Hello everyone, this is a video about obedience versus sacrifice, and I've got some examples to bring it into your daily life. This is an extremely important topic and something that we hear all the time, but I don't think is well understood. So to start, we're going to talk about King Saul. Now, who was King Saul? Saul was the first king of Israel. He was chosen by he was chosen by the Lord through the prophet Samuel. It says he was head and shoulders taller than anyone else, and he was exceedingly handsome. He was, I imagine, a natural born leader, and he was a great king until he wasn't. So, what was it that turned him from a great king into losing his kingdom? Well, let's read the story. In 1 Samuel 15:3, it reads, Now go and smite Amalek. So he's talking about the nation of the Amalekites and utterly destroy all that they have, and spare them not, but slay both man and woman, infant and suckling, ox and sheep, camel and ass. So, I mean, that's a pretty direct commandment, and it's one that flies in the face of the modern perception of Jesus, of how he's just love and we need to accept everyone. This is telling the king of the chosen people to go wipe out an entire nation, including women, children, infants, sucklings, and animals. Now, that sounds pretty harsh, and that's not the topic of this video, but I wanted to bring to your mind the allegory of the tame and the wild olive trees. And actually, these allegories are spread throughout the scriptures. And we had this family discussion on Sunday, and the way I explained this to them was King Saul was commanded to clear a field of weeds and clear out every single weed from the field. Why? So that there would be room for grass, for fruitful plants to grow and not be encumbered by the weeds. Now, this is something that you'll see. I know this looks harsh, but you'll see happens over and over in scriptures. Think about when Lehi made it to the promised land. What had happened to the people who were there before them? They were cleared out. They were all wiped away. They were all killed, except for one man. Or think about, um, okay, the Gentiles, the Americans, the British, the Europeans when they came to America. The same thing happened. The people who were there, the people who were not bringing forth fruit, were cleared out and mostly eliminated to make way for hopefully a people who would bring forth fruit. And go read Jacob chapter 5. You'll see this pattern happens over and over again, where wicked branches or branches that don't bring forth fruit are allowed to stay for hundreds of years until there's a people that will bring forth fruit, and then the Lord clears them out to make way for his chosen people. Now, if you go read 3rd Nephi, you'll see that the sword of justice is hanging over the United States right now, meaning he is ready to wipe out the United States to make way for a people who will bring forth fruit. And they're known as the remnant of Jacob. And so I invite you to go read those prophecies. That's an aside. That's not the purpose of this presentation. But that's what the Lord commanded Saul to do. And what did he do? He disobeyed. He cleared out most of the Amalekites. But he spared Agag, who I assume was the king. He spared the best sheep, the best oxen, the best fatlings, and the lambs. And then he justified this to himself so that he could use them to make a sacrifice to the Lord. And he did. He made a sacrifice to the Lord. And you can read that in 1 Samuel 15:15. Okay, so what happened? Was the Lord pleased with Saul? Oh, let's read it in verse 22. And Samuel said, Hath the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to hearken than the fat of rams. Saul's sacrifice was rejected because he chose to disobey. And okay, I'll get into that in the next slide. For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. Because thou hast rejected the word of the Lord, he hath also rejected thee from being king. So in this moment, Saul lost his kingdom. He lost his kingship. He lost his right to be the king of Israel. And soon after, David was called to be king. And then we read about his ascension to the throne and the end of Saul, and it's not pretty. There's murders and battles and war. But David becomes king next. So this is great. This is a story that's somewhat familiar, but how does it apply to us? I think it's very easy for us in the modern day to say, well, yeah, Saul, can you believe the Lord gave him a commandment through his prophet and he chose to just do his own thing? Well, I'm going to tell you that you do the exact same thing. We all do the exact same thing. Um, oh, yeah, I covered all of this. And I talked about the field of weeds, and I talked about how Saul did not trust the Lord. So if you think about the Lord's commandments, his commandment to wipe out everything, even the good, wipe out everything, clear all the weeds. Um, Saul, we don't have the same understanding that the Lord has. And the Lord has reasons that his commandments need to be executed. And it's because he knows everything. He knows the outcomes. He knows what's best. I think and I believe that he knew that had the Amalekites not been completely wiped out, they would have caused serious problems for the nation of Israel in the next several hundred years. And if you go read the history of the Bible, that's exactly what happened. And even more important to that than that, you think about the Lord's work in his glory. It's to bring forth fruit, to bring the immortality and eternal life of man. If these people left around are hindering the natural branch from bringing forth fruit, that is frustrating the works of the Lord. So this little mistake, well, maybe you could call it a big mistake, is probably much, much grander in its impact for hundreds and hundreds of years than Saul could have ever imagined. But the Lord knew, and that's why the Lord asked for obedience. He asks us to do what he commands. We can only do good as we do what he commands us to do. Okay, so I mentioned previously that you are like King Saul. I am like King Saul. So I've got pictures over here, so I'll start with this story. And this is an example of me acting like King Saul. Now, I've spoken at length in other videos about how the Lord is talking to you and to me all the time. He's talking to everyone. We all have the light of Christ. And that light is mostly ignored. It is often, we distract ourselves so that we can't even hear it. And we're so busy that we give no heed to it. So it's ignored all the day long, almost for everybody. Now, this applies to everything in your life. If you're walking down the street and you're carrying, say, 3 bags of groceries, and you have the thought, oh, I should shift these groceries or that bag's going to split. Is that a good thought? Yes. And every good thing comes from Christ. So if you don't obey that simple commandment, it is willful rebellion against what you know is best and literally rebellion against Jesus. That's a perspective you may not have thought of. Okay, so what does this have to do with overweight Brett? Well, this was me in around a couple years after we got married, and I had quickly gained about 70 pounds. You can see my pants here were baggy. I got this nice, ugly bulge, and just I was out of shape. I was obese. And honestly, what I was doing is my conscience was telling me I knew I needed to be more active. I knew I needed to manage what I was eating. And the Lord was constantly pricking my conscience, and I ignored it. I put my head down. It was years I wouldn't even look in a mirror because I did not want to see what I looked like. And I mean, my poor wife, she would even say things. She'd come in and be like, let's go for a walk, and, do everything she could to encourage any sort of improvement. The Lord does the same thing to us. He sends messengers, He sends prophets, He sends siblings, He sends spouses to influence us for good, to crack us out of our willful disobedience, to crack us out of the ruts that we get ourselves into. So you can see eventually, finally, I started to improve. I repented and I started to focus on my health. And it didn't take long before, I was a regular looking human being, a healthy human being. Now, you can say, how does this relate to Saul? Well, rather than do what I knew was best, what should have been maybe one of the top priorities in my life because of all the negative impacts that being this overweight had on my life. It was causing uncomfortableness. It was causing all sorts of issues. It was causing difficulty to sleep. My knees were going out. My back was going out. I mean, the toll that being significantly overweight takes on your body is huge. And so, for my ability to benefit my wife, my children, my family, and myself, it needed to be a super high priority. But I knew that, yet what I did was focus on other things. One of the things I focused on was being the nicest husband you could possibly imagine. And I took it to the extreme, to the point where I was just annoying Jen. And she was just like, oh my gosh, this guy's being so nice and I'm so annoyed by him. She wouldn't say that, but that's how she acted. Or I focused on some aspect of a church calling. I put 110 hours in on the church calling while completely ignoring my health. And if you think about it, the Lord wants us to use our minds. He wants us to decide what's best, follow what our conscience tells us, and focus on what's best. That is repentance. That is becoming like Jesus. He does not want us to put aside what we know to be best and come up with our own things. That is what Saul did when he offered a sacrifice that was not wanted to the Lord. Okay, so another example. So I've got family members, and I would like to keep this anonymous, but I have a situation in extended family of people I know where there is a 29 or 30-year-old woman who is living with her grandma and she's living rent free. Now, this 30-year-old woman does not know how to break free, does not know how to launch into adulthood. And her parents and her grandparents are not doing her any favors because it's uncomfortable. And so, what she needs is a kick in the pants, an awakening, and somebody to say, you can't live here for free. You've got to spread your wings and fly. And they need to stop buying her video games and things that are not encouraging her to spread her wings and fly. But that is extremely uncomfortable. So, what has her family done and said? Well, her grandma, rather than having a difficult conversation, it's impacting her negatively, the grandma, and it's impacting this young woman even worse because her life is just so far behind, and all the blessings and joy she could have are being robbed because she's not able to launch. But rather than go do what is most impactful and most important, what she knows would be best, talking about the grandma here, she spends her time on her church calling to the point where she spent 40 to 50 hours on a lesson she had, and she knitted or colored and laminated a bunch of bookmarks for these young women. And she thought, here's my sacrifice for the Lord. Here's what I'm going to do because it's good. Yet she's ignoring things that have significant and generational impact on her and on her grandchild. And it's the same thing. It's, I'm going to do something that I deem good and ignore what I know to be best, ignore what the Lord wants me to do. That's exactly what Saul did, and that's what's happening in this situation. Okay, a kid example should make it even more um, understandable or more clear. And this will be a contrived story. But imagine a mom tells her daughter she has to pick up the clutter in her room. If she doesn't, there is poison hidden in her room. If she doesn't clean it up, it's going to cause extreme harm. And so it's imperative that she cleans up her room, picks up her things. And obviously it's contrived, but this is more like reality because the Lord is commanding us to do things because the consequences of doing and not doing what he commands are much, much greater than we realize. And so imagine this mom telling the daughter, and the daughter, rather than doing what she knows is best, what her mom told her is best, and her mom even told her some of the consequences if she did or didn't do it, she instead colored a picture. She spent 4 hours coloring a picture for her mom. And then after the 4 hours, the mom comes by and asks, "Did you pick up your room? I'm really worried about you." And the girl hands her a picture. Well, how is that mom going to feel? She told her daughter what to do, what was best. She told her the consequences, and the girl offered her something else. Something honestly meaningless, and I know well intentioned. But this is the exact same thing. It's sacrifice over obedience. It's offering up something we believe to be good in place of what is best. And that means what Jesus is commanding you to do, or me. Now, the last example I have on this is about leaf cleanup. So a couple of falls ago, we have a yard with lots of trees, and so we just get um, tons and tons and tons and tons of leaves. And so we had a family yard day, and what Jen and I told our kids to do was we would make these massive piles, and we needed them to grab the piles of leaves and put them in the garbage bags. That was their only job. And we set it up so that I could do the work that required the most strength because I'm the biggest person in the family. And so I did what only I can do. And so we set up the jobs so the kids could do what they could do. And it was going to be the most effective way to get a significant amount of yard work done in the shortest amount of time. But what did my kids do? Rather than doing what I told them to do, all of them, every one of the 5 children, tried to do something different. They got bored, they got tired, they didn't want to do the work. It was uncomfortable. And so one of them picked up the broom and was sweeping off like a porch of dust. And one of them picked up the blower and asked me, "Can I use this blower? I'd really like to blow some leaves around." I mean, we already had piles. One of them picked up a rake and started running all over the yard with the rake and chasing her brother. And so some of these were just kids being kids, and some of these were, "Hey, I'm going to go do something that's productive so that I don't have to do what I don't want to do, which I know to be best because that's what my parents told me to do." It's the exact same thing. And there are countless examples in our lives where we willfully ignore our conscience. We willfully ignore the commandments the Lord is giving us to go do something that we deem good. But the Lord does not want good. We cannot produce goodness. Goodness comes from Jesus, and we are only good as we follow him. And we follow him by doing what we believe to be best. And he guides us. He's with us, he's talking to us so that we have a better understanding of what is best. And as we do what is best, as we follow his voice, he influences us and he reveals to us more about what is best. And that's how we progress. Now, that should remind you of this graph from, I've referenced this forever. As we're obeying, we are ascending. We are becoming like him. We are gaining in light, life, glory, intelligence, knowledge, and truth. This is why he wants us to obey, because he is the only way. We can only become like him by obeying him. We cannot become like him by doing what we think is good. We don't have a very good idea about what is good. Our values are skewed. He knows what's good. He knows what's valuable. He's telling us what's good and what's valuable and what's of greatest worth to us. And all he asks us to do is to trust him and obey him in all things. And then he will give us all things.